Wickland is a combination of history of politics and a history of architecture. And it's those two things that have stood the test of time. As far as I'm concerned, this is the hidden jewel that teams up with Federal Hill, just across the way. It's just a very short distance away. And this house was built a little bit later, about 10 years after Federal Hill. It was built by Charles Wickland. He was the original owner. Charles Wickland was a lawyer, and at the time, lawyers were a big deal, and they were a big business, and you can only imagine the kind of rivalry that might have went on between lawyers. But when Charles Wickland had this house built, he had it built on a grand scale. Behind me, you see these windows, these 12 panes over 12 pane windows. That's a unique feature. At the time, windows were only 9 panes over 9 panes. Everything about this house is grand. 14.5-foot ceilings. And the double parlors, which I hope you all will get to see some footage of in a bit. The double parlors were meant for entertaining. Charles Wickland was a lawyer. He got involved in politics. He became a lieutenant governor of Kentucky. That governor died, so he ascended to the office. During the course of his life, he was a United States congressman, along with serving in the state legislature during the time, and he was a postmaster general of the United States. So there was a lot of entertaining, a lot of political gathering that went on here, a lot of history made in this house in that way. While Charles Wickland was in Washington, D.C. so much of the time, he would take his 3 oldest daughters and his son Robert, and the girls met and married men from the Washington, D.C. area, judges and senators, men of real stature in Washington. His son Robert met and married a girl from Louisiana. And they moved to Louisiana. He got involved in politics, and he ran for and became governor of Louisiana. So there's 2 of the 3 governors for which this house is famous. That's our biggest claim to fame. 3 governors, 3 generations of the same family who lived in this house. His name was John Crepes Wycliffe Beckham, J.C.W. Beckham. He got involved in politics, and he was a lawyer. He was also at one time the principal of the Bardstown City Schools, which is kind of cool for us to know. And he had a hand in education as he became governor, but he was running for lieutenant governor. In the year 1900, the man there was such contention over whether he really won the election that he was actually shot in front of the old Capitol in Frankfurt. If you ever go up there, there's a whole plaque about William Goebel and the whole assassination attempt. And so he is sworn in on his deathbed, and then he died. Then J.C.W. Beckham becomes the governor. He's like 30 years old when he becomes governor, very young and single, which means that his mother, Julia, goes to Frankfurt to serve as hostess. She's not first lady because she's not married to him. She's his hostess. So she lived in Frankfurt for a few months to do that until he married later in the year. He married a girl from Owensboro. He was then elected to another full term. One of the things that I think is significant for you all as public school students in particular is that because of him, legislation got started that made textbooks in public schools free to the children. Parents no longer had to pay for those textbooks, but he was an advocate for education.
What would you say is important about the architecture in this building, and how does it kind of affect other people?
Okay, that's a good question. And one of the first things is Charles Wickland, in my opinion, wanted this house to be grand. He wanted it to make a statement. First of all, this house, the old Bloomfield road that you would have traveled at that time, was a road that came up to the top of the hill, and when you topped that hill, you would have seen 2 sides of this house. Very much, you see the side here that in this print, but you would have seen the 2 facades, and they would need to be big. So he hired as the architect John Rogers, who is the architect of St. Joseph Cathedral, and several other of the grand homes in Bardstown. He hired for his woodwork Alexander Moore, who was quite noted at the time for his woodwork. and he hired James Marshall Brown for the brickwork. So all those pieces are important. And it's significant to us today that all the floors in the house, except for the kitchen and third floor bathroom, are original. Almost 200 years they've stood the test of time. And that's a testament to me to the craftsmanship, the pride that these guys put in their work. First of all, the mantles. This mantle, we're in the library right now, what we think might have been his home law office, or it might have been where they did transactions for the estate. Could have been the family parlor. It was kind of an informal room, but very nice. But the mantle here is very nice. But you go into the parlors where they entertained. The mantles are grand. They're just very intricate. The ceilings on the first and second floor are 14 and a half feet tall. The baseboards on the first floor are about 14 to 16 inches. Of course, they get smaller the farther up you go, but one of the things that you might want to notice is how thick these walls are. The walls actually start at the basement and they go all the way to the top of the second floor, that same thickness. If you're ever in the basement, you can actually see how those walls are constructed, the rock that's used to construct those. Another thing to notice is in the corners of some of these rooms, we see finials, they call them. And in these rooms, and this room, they're made like a beehive. But when you go into the parlors, they're acorns. Attention to detail. It's just so important about that. Electricity and plumbing didn't come to this house until the 1930s when the Guthrie family lived here. And Mr. Guthrie took advantage of spaces to build the bathrooms, like under the stairway. And on the second floor, what is believed to have been a slave passage for them to move back and forth between the floors. So he took advantage of those spaces, which is really unique. Another thing that's, to me, is really unique about this house is that we have the original outhouse. The original outside bathroom is still here. The building is here. Originally, it had two ends, like, men and women's end or whatever, but it has a chimney on the back, so it had heat. And in 1820s, to have heat in your outhouse was a big deal. So I just think that everything about this house is very grand in its scale. Many of the antiques and the furnishings you see were put in later through different families who lived here. We can't attribute any of them to being original to the Wicklow, so to speak, but over time, the different families who lived here added to the house. So we're very proud of its construction and that it stood the test of time, and we are very happy to welcome people in to take a look.